when I was going through my nightmare, it was the unknowns that were the most scary. But I did then find out at that moment you can't adapt to just about anything, because I remember when I hit rock bottom, and it was the first time in my life I'd ever hit rock bottom. But I decided I was going to survive it, and regardless of what it was, I was going to try to make my family happy. I think it comes down to, how was I going to survive? So what's my greatest takeaway from losing my companies, being incarcerated, going to prison? I think it comes down to, you really learn through the experience that you can adapt to just about anything as long as you don't give up. I thought, you know, when I was going through my nightmare, it was the unknowns that were the most scary. When I first got indicted, that fear of not knowing what that meant, the charge, the shame in the community, the everything that happened around it. How was I going to survive? It was the unknown. I started surviving, started getting advice, started to seek help, talking to people, and those unknowns became known. And then I got sentenced to go to prison. That was very scary. Standing at the gates of Leavenworth Prison, waiting for that gate to open so I could walk in and surrender my freedom, not knowing what was on the other side of that 1879 prison of Leavenworth, in the bowels of that basement where you got processed through. It was the unknown, the scary unknown. And as I started stepping through that and getting our surround of more knowledge, I started getting the knowns. It wasn't as scary. And then it just started back again. When after 3 years in prison, then it was the unknowns of going back out. Yes, I was coming back out to my family. And I couldn't wait for that. But the other unknowns that surrounded all that, how am I going to do? How am I going to fit back in? How are people going to perceive me? And as that started to happen, the unknowns became known, and I could start walking, stepping through those. Family is by far my biggest. People say I lost it all. I didn't. I have a very strong family. We got through our nightmare together and leaned on each other, and everybody was affected differently as we went through this family nightmare, and everybody survived. Close friends, incredibly important as a takeaway. I always think, what do you want at the end of your life? You want that strong family, those moments that you hope you didn't miss or regret, and those close friends. Material things. Material things is an odd thing, isn't it? I'm a guy that, strangely enough, grew up privileged with a dad who was an attorney and did well in business, and we were probably perceived as one of the wealthier families in town. And we lost it all. My dad went to prison, and I was just getting out of the 8th grade to be a freshman. We left the town in shame and packed up and moved to a new city to get a new start. And all that fancy stuff that we had, the big house and cars and vacations and pools and all those things that went along with that, we started completely over as a week to week get by family. But then we became wealthy again, wealthier than we were before. And I know that when I was at that time in my life, in my 20s and 30s, having lost everything and then being wealthy before that, you perceive material things differently. You think of them as they could be here today and gone tomorrow, so you might as well enjoy it. But they're not everything. They're nice to have, but they're not everything. So when I lost it, when I was material things and the companies and all the nice things around, it was bad. But I did then find out at that moment, you can't adapt to just about anything, because from all those material things, going to a plastic chair, a a metal locker, and a bunk bed at Leavenworth Prison, you can also survive that. But how do you survive? I remember when I hit rock bottom, and it was the first time in my life I'd ever hit rock bottom. It was a moment in time when I had never felt so sorry for myself. It was the day before I was going to go down and plead guilty after a 6-year battle with the federal government. And I really thought, I was by myself, I was drinking, and I really thought that I didn't know if I wanted to be around. I didn't know that if my family needed me around, or the stain of me coming back as an ex-felon. And I really was brought so far down. And I came back, shook myself loose from that terrible, god-awful feeling of pity that, no, I want to be a survivor. I'm not a victim. A victim is somebody that points their fingers and they blame and they feel sorry for themselves and they curl up in a fetal position and they can't fight anything. A survivor is somebody, it just makes you feel different when you say it. It just makes you step through things differently. You feel stronger saying you're a survivor. That moment, that night, when I hit my rock bottom and didn't think that I wanted to be here anymore, I realized that no matter what, I had things that I wanted to still do, and I had things I loved that I wanted to be around for. And so what was I going to do? I was going to step through it, and all the bad things that I had to step forward to, go down and plead guilty to federal courthouse the next day, go to prison where I didn't know I was going to go for how long. All those things were really bad things. But I decided I was going to survive it. And regardless of what it was, I was going to try to make my family happy and how I was handling the situation. So by the time I got to Leavenworth, by the time I was standing in front of that fence and that gate to step through the unknowns, to soon become known, I started realizing that, you can just about adapt to anything as long as you don't quit. Just don't quit. That's the biggest piece out of it. And when you think about quitting, look around. Check things out, because there's always somebody around that's getting it right. There's always somebody around you that's getting it right. Look at them, find out, talk to them, and see what they're doing. And they'll tell you, most times people who are getting it right want to talk to you about how they're getting it right. They're proud of how they're getting it right. That's what I did. Started reaching out to people and for help, humbling myself. And then I would implement what they were doing on getting it right, whether it was in prison or getting out of prison or whatever the case was. And I started implementing that into my life, bringing that into my life and replicating that, putting that into my routine. That's the thing that can jumpstart you into a new way, a new feel, is finding somebody who's getting it right. Let them help you. They'll become your mentor because they want to make sure that you're doing it the way they're doing it. And you can start stepping out of the funk that you're in and stepping into a new routine and feeling good about yourself because you're taking a step at a time. You're surviving. You're asking for help. It's working. It's like getting the answers to the test before the test. Somebody who's getting it right, they're already getting it right. And they'll share it with you if you humble yourself just enough to say, hey, man, I like what you're doing. It seems like you're doing it really well. How are you doing it? It worked for me in prison, worked for me in business, worked for me when I got out of prison. You just got to humble yourself and get yourself back into that ability to recognize you need help, to start stepping into a new routine, a new way of feeling. It's all about the feel. But if I look back, and my biggest takeaway is you can adapt to just about anything as long as you don't give up, as long as you keep stepping forward. And you can get knocked down. I mean, all the greatest books that you'll read, all the greatest founders of companies and inventions, they got knocked down so many times and failed so many times. That's why they figured out that they weren't going to do that again. They were going to do this. Just learn from it and you step forward and look around for the people who are getting it right and implement their stuff into your world, because you can adapt just about anything. The unknowns are the scary part of the nightmare. Once they become known, you can start stepping through them. You can start knocking them down. You can start setting yourself free. Once the unknowns become knowns, nothing is as bad as your mind makes it out to be. Not even prison.